one of the things I most consistently see that helps people get ahead in their career and in life, regardless of the industry, is being willing to engage in difficult conversations.
Hello, and welcome back to The Blueprint, an FPA NexGen podcast. Today, we're joined by Stephen Jarvis, CEO and co-founder of Retirement Tax Services. We dive into how to partner with tax professionals as a financial planner, how nothing truly replaces getting your reps in when developing a new skill, and how technical skills really do matter, but communication skills are what truly will set you apart. Let's take it away.
All right, Stephen, thanks for joining us on this episode of The Blueprint. You're known as one of these tax guys. So, what is your favorite unique part of the tax code?
I try to remind people all the time to not look for logic in the tax code because it really wasn't written from like a common sense standpoint. It really every single rule has a lobbyist or politician behind it, not to be too cynical. And so, man, there's so many. Well, one of my favorites to point out is that, I mean, we've got a deduction for being blind but not being deaf. So at some point they ranked all of the potential disabilities. The one that will never like leave my mind is in when I was getting my accounting degree, we specifically went through the code section that makes illegal activities taxable, which is how like famously big time mafia and gangsters were arrested, Al Capone, things like that. Like there are written sections of the tax code that make illegal activities taxable. That's not really super relevant to anybody listening to this podcast, but if we want to go super unique, like that is the thing that stands out to me the most is your illegal activities are still taxable.
Yeah, it's really funny to think someone had a discussion about some of the things they put into the tax code, like hours on hours of conversations.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of dove right into it, but Stephen, why don't you just give us your background, your journey? You know, you're the lead of Retirement Tax Services. You have a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into accounting because when I was in school in 2008, it felt like from the perspective of a student at that time, I was under the impression that no one had jobs anymore, that there never would be jobs again, and that like all of this time in school was probably a waste of my time, which that's clearly overly dramatic. But that's the way it felt being on the student side. And even though hopefully there aren't students who feel that way now, like I get like that feeling of I've put all this time in. Like, what am I going to do next? And numbers came to me really naturally. And it just seemed like there was a lot of jobs in accounting because everyone has to pay taxes every year. Everyone has to file reports every year. And so I got a degree in accounting. As soon as I got into the CPA world, I realized I didn't really fit the mold, that I'm not really a stereotypical CPA. And so it took me quite a few years. I was in big public accounting firms for about 10 years before I started Retirement Tax Services, where I now focus on working alongside financial advisors to help them do more on taxes with their clients. So I spent, in addition to, we just prepared about 500 tax returns and extended about another 100 with real taxpayers. I spent a lot of time working with financial advisors, helping them level up what they're doing around taxes. So I have the firsthand client experience, as well as I talk to thousands of advisors every year and help them navigate the challenges they run into as well.
I'd love to hear your perception on how closely tax planning and financial planning are linked and why it's so important to consider each of them whenever you are working with clients.
Yeah, so a little bit more of my origin story. I grew up around financial planning. My dad got into life insurance when I was like 8 or 9. That pretty quickly for him turned into financial planning. He became a CFP, all of those things. And so I grew up around the industry, then went and did accounting, but still had that connection. And so about 5 years ago, financial advisors I knew basically started coming to me saying, "Hey, we can't find CPAs who will play nice with us. We think there's this opportunity. If there was a CPA who could help financial advisors do more on this topic, we think there's a huge opportunity there." And the way they initially described it, I thought, "Hey guys, this sounds overly simplistic. This has to already exist," because they weren't even asking for help on really nuanced technical areas of the tax code. They were just asking for someone, literally, let's play nice in the sandbox together. And as I looked into, as I started talking to more advisors and just looking at what was out there, I realized that they were spot on. There's this huge gap where CPAs kind of exist in one lane, financial advisors in another, and for some reason there's not a whole lot of overlap. And so when I first started doing this, one of the comments I would make is that, hey, they're really great financial advisors are proactively addressing taxes. And while I still think that's true, my tune's changed just a little bit because what I've realized, or what I've realized more fully, I think it makes sense once I say it, is that every money decision has a tax impact. So it's not that you're suddenly a great financial advisor if you think about taxes. It's really that you're irresponsible if you don't. And if that sounds harsh, sorry, sometimes we need to hear it, but every money movement you make has a tax impact. If you're not at a minimum helping facilitate the discussion around taxes, you're being irresponsible. That doesn't mean you have to be a tax expert yourself, but you have to at least be aware and acknowledge that impact is there, help the client with the portion that you can, and help facilitate bringing in an expert where it's needed.
Yeah, just on the point of we want CPAs that play nice with financial advisors. I had a situation where I was sending a tax letter to the CPA
Yeah.
and I sent it in my own secure
Mhm.
link.
Yeah.
And they said, we can't click on that link. Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Can I
Yep.
upload it to your link? Nope, this link is only for the clients. So the
Yep.
client had to go download from my secure link and upload to their secure link. And it's what we're two professionals. We should be able
Yep.
to interact with each other easily.
Well, so Mike, let me put you on the spot here just a little bit. But before sending that link, like what had been your conversation with the CPA about why you were sending the letter and why it was helpful for the CPA to have it?
Yes, we did talk on the phone about what's the strategy that we're doing. For that client, it was a backdoor Roth IRA. Everything
Nice.
else is going pre-tax. So the tax letter just had the tax documents and that
Got it. Okay.
backdoor Roth contribution.
Hey, well, good for you for having that conversation. I see a lot of advisors who jump right to, well, hey, let me just start sending stuff to tax preparers, which I love that you're having that conversation because a lot of times part of what gets missed is explaining what the value proposition is. Because from the tax preparer's standpoint, if you haven't taken the time like you're describing to help build the relationship, I mean, they might see it a lot of different ways. They might see it as, hey, this is just one more thing I have to hassle with. I don't want to deal with it. This is somebody else trying to encroach on what I'm doing with my client. I don't want to deal with it. This is somebody outside of their lane. I don't want to deal with it. You see these different kinds of things. One of the things that just for perspective for people who haven't had a lot of chances to work with CPAs or other tax professionals, the IRS does have very stringent rules around information sharing when it comes to working in this tax prep field. So to the point where if I'm sharing tax information with a financial advisor, which I do all the time, but under very specific circumstances, I have to have the client sign an information sharing consent that includes language about how the client can report me to the IRS for misconduct if they think I'm pressuring them into doing it. And so, see, especially for CPAs who've been in the industry for a while, they do have this maybe sometimes excessive level of hesitance to share information, and it's not personally directed at that specific financial advisor, but it does mean that the financial advisor might have some additional work to do to build that relationship to the point where this can happen seamlessly.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that because that's not a perspective I would have taken or thought of.
Yeah.
And while we did talk with that CPA in that scenario, there was definitely other CPAs where we just started sending tax letters. Absolutely.
Well, and one of the things that I've seen be really helpful, Mike, and as you think of those other CPAs you have had those conversations with, is really, and I will say that this is going to sound like I'm just like giving the CPAs a free pass on how they do things, but I mean, we're here talking to financial advisors, so I like to focus on the things that we can control. And so to set yourself up for the highest chance of success, we want to focus as much as we can on how this is valuable for the client and how it makes the CPA's life easier. And so if we want to send a tax letter to a CPA, which I'm a huge advocate for, it's a huge value add to clients. We need to make it really clear why it's a benefit to the client and the CPA. And some of the language that I really like is just reinforcing that, hey, as the financial advisor, I'm sending you this information because these are tax impacts we created, and we just want to make sure that we're sharing everything that you need, or even reminding the tax professional is like, hey, sometimes I know that the 1099s don't provide all the information that you need to do your job. So I just want to prevent some questions during your really busy time of year. Or, and I mean, especially if you're having the conversation with the clients, it can be really easy to say, hey, as I worked with Bob and Sue, here's some things we did together. They asked me that I provide this information to make sure that they got it right. And so we're tying it back where we can to here's why I'm providing this. And it can take a little bit of time to build those relationships, but we've seen it be really effective time and time again.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the step of explaining why it's valuable to the client and to the CPA.
Yeah, of course.
So let's say a advisor is listening to this podcast, this episode,
Yeah.
they don't do tax planning. What is
Yeah.
the first thing they can do to like get their toes wet in helping their clients with tax planning?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say that they don't do tax planning yet because there's part of me that hopes that every advisor knows that at some point they need to start doing tax planning. But great, let's start with we're not doing any of it yet. What's that very first step? And if I've done none of it in the past, the first step I recommend to everyone is pick up your own tax return. Is start with what's in front of you and what you have and what you know, because the tax return will absolutely help us with forward tax planning. It also just helps us better understand our clients. And so by picking up your own tax return, one is it's just good for you as a person because you should be following the advice that you give your clients as well. But it also, like, we can pick up that tax return and hopefully we know all the context of our own situation. And so we pick up that tax return and say, okay, if I didn't know this was me, what could I learn about this person and what would I recommend to them? And go line by line and say, okay, here's what I could learn about this person if I didn't know anything else. And of course, you're fact checking yourself because this is your tax return. And then going through and yes, you might be in a very different financial situation than the clients that you work with, but it's still that exercise of when I get to line 4 and I see you talked about back to a Roth contribution before. If I get to line 4 and I see that wait, I know this is a high earning W-2 employee and they've got a taxable amount in box 4B. Wait, did their backdoor Roth contribution get reported incorrectly? And so being able to go through, start with your own tax return, and then from there, it's best way to get stronger is to pick the weights up and put them back down as many times as we can, right? Just to get the reps in. And so I'm a huge fan of a lot of different resources, education, softwares, all those kinds of things. I offer a lot of those things. So clearly I'm a big fan of them. But at the end of the day, if you're not going to pick up the weights and put them back down, it doesn't matter what weights you have. So all that to say, especially if you're starting from square one, start with your own tax returns, start with client tax returns, get your hands on the real thing before you get too carried away with what's the perfect lesson plan to follow.
Starting out in the industry, trying to get your reps, it can be a little bit intimidating going
Mm.
up to tax professionals and trying to work with them on some of these tax planning concepts, especially newer in the field. And there's not as many younger tax preparers coming in as there are younger financial planners coming in. How do you recommend breaking the ice or making introductions with CPAs to start building that bridge to do effective tax planning?
The single most effective line that I've ever seen used in practice when it comes to building relationships with other professionals, especially CPAs and enrolled agents, is can I pay for an hour of your time? And that needs to be followed by a specific request, but can I pay for an hour of your time to better understand how I can help my clients do backdoor Roth contributions without ruining their tax return? Would be an example. Can I pay for an hour of your time? I'm brand new to this industry. I know what I do has a big tax impact, and I'm trying not to make CPA's life harder. Like having some kind of approach where, because especially in the digital world we live in, every professional service provider gets bombarded with that. Can we have a coffee chat? Can we go to lunch? Can we play golf? Can I get you a gift card to show you my software? Whatever it is, we've all been bombarded by those, and we ignore almost all of them. The only trade-off to me making this recommendation is that people listen, and then I get these reach outs as well, which is always fun for me when somebody reaches out to me and says, "Hey, Stephen, can I pay for an hour of your time?" But the reason it works so well is since we get bombarded by these, it immediately sets somebody apart. Of hey, I'm serious about this, and I really want to do something different. It also then the person you're talking to is going to come to the table much more prepared and willing to offer you real meaningful insight and advice because you didn't try to trick them into sitting down for an hour of lunch and like hope you can like work your way around to an important question. You just straight up told them your time is valuable. I want to pay for it. Here are the kinds of questions I'm going to ask. What I've found in practice is that maybe half the time they'll actually insist that you pay. A lot of times they'll be impressed that you offered and you'll get their time anyways. And let's say worst case, we'll use that kind of loosely, but let's say worst case, they say, yes, go ahead and pay for an hour of my time. So now you've paid a couple $100s to spend an hour with someone who's an expert in what you need to know. Like that's not a losing situation. Even if they never talk to you again after that, they never send you a referral. If you go prepared with good questions, like you're talking to an expert in their field, and you're getting valuable insight. And so, yeah, that's worth it to me every single time. Now, what's more likely to happen is that you can use that opportunity to demonstrate how you're different from every financial advisor they've heard from before, because I promise they've heard from lots of them. And now you're the first person to come to mind when a client inevitably comes to their CPA and says, geez, I'm not ready for retirement. Like, I really need to talk to somebody about my investments. Like, oh, Allison was just here recently. She was asking these great questions. I know she takes care of her clients. Or, oh, Mike sends these tax letters every year. I know he takes this stuff seriously. You should talk to Mike. And so you're looking for these opportunities to learn and increase your expertise, but you're also setting yourself apart at the same time to these tax professionals of, oh, that was a financial advisor who clearly is doing something different for their clients.
Yeah, so let's continue down that path because you're kind of
Yeah.
getting to the point of let's start being referral partners. I'll
Yeah.
send you some clients, maybe you send me a client. So from the tax preparer's perspective, what makes a good referral partner and an advisor?
It does still seem like it's more the exception than the norm that there is a consistent referral flow from tax professionals to financial advisors. I know financial advisors who have built significant portions of their business based on those referral relationships, but it's not automatic. It's not commonplace unless you're really intentional with how that happens. And so some of the things that set those advisors apart is they've taken the time to make it really clear to that tax professional in their life of here are the types of clients I serve, the types of problems I solve. Here are examples of how we deliver value to our clients that's different than our peers. And here are the things that you can be on the lookout for that would say, hey, it's time to give Mike a call. Because growing up as a CPA, I was told just like every professional service provider of any kind, I think it's true for financial advisors, people in insurance, people in legal, like all of us were, hey, go to Chamber of Commerce meetings, go to your local whatever group, meet every network, do all those things. And so we've all like been to those, like we've heard 1,000 of those elevator pitches that nobody really remembers or cares about. But if your financial planning is still a rather ambiguous term for most of the world, and so for a lot of tax professionals, financial planner gets lumped into this really ambiguous area that really just means sales. And I don't think sales is a dirty word, but if all you're thinking is, hey, my client is going to get sold, and you don't know what happens after that, you're never going to refer somebody. I'm thinking about other areas of your life and how infrequently you actually give recommendations to people because you're putting your relationship capital on the line. So the only way I'm going to tell a client, hey, you need to call Allison, is if I'm clear of what's going to happen when they call Allison, of who's going to answer the phone and what kind of information are they going to ask for and how much are they going to charge my client, at least some kind of range. Like what's the outcome going to be? How am I going to know in a year that it was worth it for me to have sent that client that way? And so you have to look for those opportunities to show here's how we deliver value, because for most people, including tax professionals, it's a bit of a vague concept of what is it that a financial planner actually does. And so when I talk to tax professionals and they have financial advisors they're excited to send referrals to, it almost always comes back to like a specific story or a specific instance of they got to see firsthand, either from another client that they were working with that also worked with a financial advisor, or because a financial advisor was able to share with them like a specific, like, here's something I did to help a client. And yeah, it always comes back to those stories of, oh, Bob and Sue had this problem. Mike was able to solve that problem. When I see other people with a similar problem to Bob and Sue, I'm going to call Mike because he solved that problem. It's never just oh, well, everybody needs a financial advisor, so let me just post Mike's picture on my wall. Like, it comes back to those stories in specific situations. Mike, this wasn't really specifically in your question, but just, and this maybe seems like overly nuanced, but you started this with talking about referral partnerships. And I will say that in general, these referral relationships tend to be very one-sided for extended periods of time. The advisors that I see be the most successful with this don't go in expecting like, I'm going to send 2 referrals to you and you're going to send 2 referrals to me, because that's not the dynamic that exists in those two industries. For the most part, financial advisors are more in an industry where not everybody even thinks they need financial planning. So you have a bigger hurdle to identifying prospects and clients. And so a lot of times financial advisors will have more intentional and strategic prospecting pipelines. Whereas tax professionals, this is a known thing we all have to do every year. And so if anything, tax professionals are more often turning away business. And so there's not as much of a need on the financial or the tax professional side of, hey, more often than not, they'll probably turn away your referrals anyways. But if you go in with hey, this is going to be a one-to-one relationship, the financial advisor will be disappointed every single time. If you go into it saying, hey, I know my clients need good help on taxes, So I'm going to refer clients to a tax professional if I think they're going to do a good job, whether I think I'm going to get a referral back or not. And then I'm going to look for opportunities to demonstrate to those tax professionals, here's how I serve my clients differently. That's where over the long term, you're going to have the best results. But if you go in on day one assuming, hey, this is going to be an equal partnership, you're likely to be disappointed.
Completely agree. I've had several CPA relationships where they're at capacity. It's hard for
Mhm.
them to accept new clients because they're already have a full book. They don't really need more clients. And so it's a bit of an interesting relationship there on the referral side. And I'm interested to hear your perspective on the evolving landscape we're seeing, having more financial planning firms, especially the larger ones, incorporate tax planning as part of their service offering and tax preparation as part of their service offering, as well as having fewer tax preparers coming into the workforce. We're seeing a lot more, at least anecdotally, a lot more accountants going into the audit side rather than the tax preparation side. So I'm interested to hear your perspective on how you see the relationship evolving going forward and how you see the profession evolving going forward.
I spend a lot more time focused on the financial planning industry than I do the tax prep industry, just because of who I work with. But I will say that in the last probably 6 to 12 months, there has been at least more encouraging numbers on the accounting side as far as people like the industry is trying to adjust. I think it'll be a slow process, but I try to stay optimistic that it's not that we've had a permanent shift and it's never going to recover. But while we wait for that change to take place, we are certainly seeing those dynamics that you're talking about, where there's a huge need for tax professionals that doesn't seem that demand is outpacing supply. And so you're seeing more financial planning firms saying, well, if we can't find CPAs to do it externally, like what would it look like if we did this in-house? And so I do think while you have some firms that are trying to incorporate both tax prep and tax planning, those can happen separately. And we definitely see more firms leaning into just the tax planning side. And that I'm a fan of across the board. Because like I said before, I think it's irresponsible if you're not addressing the tax piece in some way, because the money movements, the money decisions have a tax impact. And so what that looks like is going to depend on the clientele being served. That can start as simple as, hey, we're going to request tax returns from our clients every single year just to make sure that the work we did together showed up there correctly. That's always my favorite starting point, is like, let's just double check our own work, because if it doesn't get reported on the tax return, it doesn't count. And then now we have the information, we can start building from there. And again, we can start really simple. We can start as simple as, hey, on every one of our clients, we're going to make sure that they max funded all of their qualified accounts, and we're going to double check them on their tax return. We're going to make recommendations if they haven't. And that might not feel like sophisticated tax planning, and it's really not sophisticated, but if it's not happening consistently yet, it is an opportunity. And then as we get more expertise, as we get more reps in, as we have a better system for delivering value, then we can keep expanding what are those things that are most relevant to our clients. The great news is that especially if we've narrowly defined who we work with, we don't need to digest and commit to memory the entire 80,000 page tax code. We can start with the 4 or 5 or 6 or maybe a dozen or at most 2 dozen things that are relevant to our clients and become really, really knowledgeable on those things. So I see huge opportunity when it comes to tax planning. There's a lot of great tools being created to help advisors with tax planning. And I'm a big fan of tools. We just got to remember that tools need operators. We can't assume that just getting the shiniest piece of software on its own makes us experts. Like, we also need to be able to be that expert for our clients and help them navigate that. On the tax prep side of it, that definitely comes with a different set of considerations. And I would say that I see a bit of mixed results on how that goes when financial planning firms incorporate tax prep. I do know some firms that are doing some really great work around that. We look at some of the firms that usually it's because they're partnering with CPAs, existing CPA firms, and integrating the two. And there's enough overlap in what we're trying to accomplish for clients that it can be very successful. But since it is two distinct business models, it takes a lot of really intentional work and leadership to make that successful. I see a lot of advisors who get really excited about it, some who try it. I was talking to an advisor within the last week who has recently just sold his tax prep practice because he didn't feel like the risk was worth the potential reward within his business, that the compliance risk, the liability risk was worth the profit margin that it generated. And so I think there's the potential opportunity there. I don't know that there's a consistent model to copy of here's how it works every time.
You said that While there's great planning software and that's cool,
Yeah.
you need a really good operator behind it.
Yeah, yeah.
On that vein, what's your opinion of newer advisors getting some sort of tax designation?
My general opinion on designations, whether you're a tax professional like I am, whether we're talking to financial advisors, if we're in the professional services world, I think typically it's pretty important to get a designation of some kind as a baseline for what you're doing. The, and to be clear, I'm a CPA. I have an MBA. I've taught in graduate programs. Like I'm not opposed to designations, courses, programs, all those kinds of things. I think reps are more important. I think the real world experience is more important. And so if you want to get involved in tax planning, get involved in tax planning. Pick up tax returns, start having the conversations, get the reps in. Now, some people just their learning style, like they need a really structured approach to getting that done. Some people need a forcing mechanism to say, yes, if I don't pay the thousands of dollars for the coursework and the designation, I'm just never going to do it. And if that's you, hey, I get it. We all do this different ways. But the designation itself is never going to just magically make you good at this. And so, especially if you already have a designation that allows you to do the work that you want to do, focus on the reps, not on the alphabet soup.
Yeah, just an anecdotal point. I am an enrolled agent.
Yeah.
While studying for it, I didn't look at a single 1040.
Hmm.
And while I learned a lot from the program, it didn't help me learn more about taxes. What helped me learn more about taxes was having more confidence to pick up more 1040s.
Well, and Mike, I really appreciate you saying that. I didn't know that you were an enrolled agent, and I am a big fan of the enrolled agent designation. I have somebody on my team working on getting one, but I'm a big fan of it for people who want to prepare taxes. Because to your point, the enrolled agent coursework is almost entirely compliance focused. It comes in three different sections, and depending on the types of clients you serve, if you're lucky, one of those sections will be relevant, and the other two you're never going to touch again. And even the section that's going to be relevant, it's going to be relevant in pieces, and probably a lot of it, again, you're never going to see again. It doesn't make you better at communicating with clients. It doesn't make you better at identifying tax planning opportunities. It makes you better at navigating, preparing a tax return. And so if your goal is not to prepare tax returns, when people ask me specifically about the EA, that my first question is always, do you want to prepare tax returns? Their answer is no, don't get an EA.
Is there a designation that you think is beneficial if you are wanting to get further into tax planning? Of course, the CFP has a tax section within it, so the CFP does introduce you to valuable tax planning concepts. But is there a further designation that you see as helpful for those that are looking to get those letters behind their name?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll get the acronym wrong. I know that the American College is about a year into their tax plan designation that Jeff Levine was instrumental in creating. It's actually kind enough to share the syllabus with me before they released it. There's a lot of great materials in there. We're in the process of working on some coursework and potentially some certificates around tax planning as well, because people ask us for it all the time. But whether it's the American College or the things that we're coming out with, it still comes back to the most valuable thing you can do is get the reps in. If your learning style, your approach, like you're just not going to do it without that framework, then yeah, there's some great resources out there. But whether we're talking about taxes or any other area that I'm on the consumer side of, I care so much less about your designation, if I care at all, than I do about who do you typically serve, what problems do you typically help resolve, and how is that going to affect me as the consumer. So for me, getting the reps in is always going to trump anything else you do.
So one thing you always say, or one action items you always talk about on your podcast is just get the tax returns, start getting your clients' tax returns. What are the Jedi mind tricks that advisors can use to start having clients send their tax returns?
The simplest thing to do is ask. And I feel a little bit silly to say, but I'm always surprised at the number of times that advisors stop short of even that point. They throw up all these almost mental obstacles for themselves of why they've decided on their client's behalf why the client would never send them a tax return. And so they have these objections of, well, the client already has a tax professional, so why would they send it to me? If they send me the tax return, they're going to expect that I'm blessing it and it's perfect now. What if they send it to me and I don't save them $1 million in taxes? I'm going to be a failure. Like they throw up all these mental obstacles, and it's like just ask for the tax return. And like anything else we do, especially if we're worried about what the client expectations are going to be, great. You set the expectations up front, which, by the way, you should be doing with any service you provide. If you don't set expectations, people will make them up and you'll never live up to them. And so rather than generically say, hey, Mike, could you send me your tax return this year? when I work with advisors on asking for tax returns, we make it really clear. Especially if you've never done this before, we're going to start super simple. And we're going to set very, very clear and simple expectations. We're going to say, hey, Mike, as you know, we're always looking for more ways to deliver value to our clients. One of the things we're starting this year is that we're asking all of our clients to send their tax returns in so that we can make sure that the work we did together got reported correctly. And we can even take it a step further and say, hey, Mike, we have this taxable brokerage account that we work with you on, and it produces dividends and capital gains, which are super exciting, but we want to make sure those get reported on your tax return. So when you send your tax return in, we're just going to do a quick double check of that specific piece to make sure the work we did got reported correctly. Would that be okay? Who's going to say no to that? Everyone's like, oh, of course I want to make sure that was reported correctly. And then I'm going to make it really simple. We have a templated letter that we have advisors send out where we just the other piece in there is, and here's how you're easily going to provide it to us. Because that's where a lot of advisors kind of lose traction on this, is that nobody actually wants homework. Like, well, obviously we need information from clients, but again, in our industry or anybody else's, when you go and pay someone else to do something for you, you want to do as little as possible. So when we are asking our clients, when we are creating friction, we need to look for like the smallest possible amount of friction to create. So whether that's a secure link or a fax number, they're bringing it to your office, whatever mechanisms you have for them to provide that tax return, you need to make it super clear and as easy as possible of, okay, here's what we need, here's how you're going to provide it, and here's how quickly we're going to get back to you with what we did. And for advisors who are asking for tax returns for the first time, I would start that simple of just telling them, we're going to confirm that these couple of things were right. Would that be okay with you? Now, once I have the tax returns, now I get to start looking for other things that are relevant to my clients. And so a couple of years ago, I went through and put together a checklist of here's all the things that I commonly see for my clients. And so it ended up being this 37-point checklist that we go through to say, what other opportunities might there be? And so but as an advisor, you don't have to start by saying, Mr. and Mrs. Client, send me your tax return. I'm going to look through these 37 things. You can say, here's this one thing I'm going to do. You can still look through for the 37 things. And in your next client meeting, you're saying, geez, Allison, we went through your tax return and we saw these couple of opportunities. Would be okay if we talked about this more.
Thank you very much for helping to introduce how to even start having those conversations for those that have not started. It's really valuable to just know it's not as big of a deal as you need to make it out to be. You can just start with a baby step and get the ball rolling. And that's going to be much more valuable in the long run, having done it rather than just not done it. In bringing that same concept back to your career and how you've gotten to where you are, and thinking about whenever you are in those first 5 years, what is one thing that you started or stopped doing that really helped accelerate your career?
Might feel like a leap from what we've been talking about here, but one of the things I most consistently see that helps people get ahead in their career and in life, regardless of the industry, is being willing to engage in difficult conversations. Whether that's with a client on like an actual difficult conversation, like navigating family relationships or death or whatever that might be, things that come up with financial planning. That could be with coworkers, with bosses, with employees, whatever direction that's in. But the willingness to engage in difficult conversations and then learn from them, because if you always get them perfectly right, you probably aren't actually engaging in difficult conversations. But that's a skill that's not replaceable by AI. It's a skill that most people shy away from. And it's a skill that will add value regardless of the topic, regardless of how the tax laws change. Even if all of the tax plan opportunities are different a year from now and I have to relearn all the technical information, the skills I have around client communication and helping people navigate complex areas and having these difficult conversations, those are things that will always be a value add to me. And especially early in your career, they are things that you have to be willing to be really uncomfortable and probably even seek out. Because that's one of those things that naturally just kind of gets pushed up the food chain of, oh, if there's a difficult conversation to be had, that's the partner's job, that's the boss's job, that's the owner's job, whoever that is. And so finding opportunities to witness those, to participate in those, and then to lead those are things that will really set you apart.
Communication skills we've talked about a lot on this podcast, and podcasting is a way to develop communication skills. So what was the genesis of your podcast for retirement tax services?
So when I started into all this, as far as creating retirement tax services, working alongside financial advisors, the financial advisors who like helped me identify this opportunity and get started on all this, they were already podcasting as well. And so that was part of where the motivation came from, was like, hey, this is a great way to share information with a lot of people. So I'm literally almost exactly 5 years into this. If we were rewind 6 years ago and you say, hey, when I'm still a big public accounting firm, you say, hey, Stephen, you should start a podcast as a CPA, I would have laughed at you and thought that was never going to be a thing. And so, I mean, so a little bit I was pushed into it by other people who were already doing it. But then as I got into it, like, geez, because I have one podcast ongoing now. I had another consumer-facing podcast for a few years that we've put on hold. But between the two, I've hosted over 300 episodes of these two podcasts at this point and guested on countless others. And it is such a great way to refine how you communicate on complex topics. And so one of the things it's done for me that you can replicate whether you do a podcast or not is there is something about having to listen back to yourself talk that will improve your communication skills more than anything else. And so especially if you don't have a podcast to practice that on, you should 100% be practicing those, particularly those difficult topics, in front of a mirror or on a recording. Everybody has a cell phone that can record them. And so if you have a topic you're struggling to articulate or something new you want to present to a client, record yourself and listen back to it. And I promise it will be painful. For most of the human population, listening to yourself is painful. One, because like scientifically, I don't remember how it works, but we all hear ourselves differently in our heads than we do on a recording. So that part is a little bit uncomfortable to begin with. And then we all tend to be pretty big critics of ourselves. And so listening back and noticing the number of times you said or the number of times you rushed a word, or I have this tendency, if I'm not thinking really clearly about it, I'll switch the first letters of consecutive words. And so it's this thing that nobody else really notices very often. When I listen back to a recording, it drives me nuts. But by being willing to listen back to myself talk, and then, oh, of course I'm going to do that different. Of course I'm going to do that different. And it seems a little strange when we talk about it in terms of financial planning or being a tax professional, but anybody else who performs at a high level, if we look at professional athletes, musicians, performers, whoever it is, anybody else who performs at a high level, which that should be our goal. Even if we're not doing it on a huge stage, we should want to perform at a high level for our clients. They all practice, they all rehearse, they all watch game tape to identify their weaknesses and do better. And so if you want to be the best at what you do, you need to do the same thing. You need to find opportunities to record yourself performing and then be willing to improve.
That's a great analogy. I've never thought about having a podcast, like having my own personal film room I can go back to and evaluate, but that is very true. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to join the podcast, to work on that communication skill and be able to have that feedback loop in a sense of how am I communicating. So great analogy there. Before we close up this episode, I want to give you the floor. Is there any information that you think would be super valuable for our listeners, or anything you want to just leave as closing remarks?
Information only has value if you take action. So I thank you for listening to this episode. Hopefully it feels valuable as you're listening to it. But the only way, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, the time you spent on this episode or any other episode of this podcast, the only way it's valuable is if you do something with it. And that doesn't mean you need to do all the things we talked about. If you can pick one thing from each episode of this podcast you listen to that then goes on your calendar, that then you implement, that's where the value is. Your clients aren't looking for you to be able to recite a bunch of interesting information. They want to know how you're going to help them execute and improve their lives. And so that's my message as often as I can possibly share it, is value or action is where the value comes in. And so look for ways that you can take something and say, okay, that's something I can do. So whether it's requesting client tax returns, it's picking up your own tax return, it's watching a recording of yourself, even if you just pick one thing, that's what I love to hear from people. As much as it's nice for people to tell me that they heard me on a podcast and it sounded great, what I really want to hear is, I heard you on a podcast and here's something I did different. That's the most flattering thing I can hear.
Absolutely. You can listen to 1,000 episodes of podcasts, and if you do nothing with it, well, then you might as well not have listened anyways.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure. This has been The Blueprint, an FPA NexGen podcast. We'll see you in the next episode.